Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I am joined today by former SNP MSP Linda Fabiani. Nice to have you.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Patrick.
For our first story today, we've got a Ukraine update, day 1047 of a conflict. Russia says Ukraine has launched a new attack in the Kursk region of western Russia, where Russian troops have been trying to eject Ukrainian forces for the past 5 months. On Sunday, Russia's defense ministry said its forces were beating back the Ukrainian forces, but Russian military bloggers reported fierce fighting and some said the Russian side had come under heavy pressure. Ukraine's general staff said 42 combat clashes took place on Sunday in the Kursk area, with 12 continuing. Andriy Yermak, the head of President Zelensky's office, posted on Telegram that there was good news from Kursk, adding, Russia is getting what it deserves. The Ukrainian army did not comment on the operation, simply saying in its daily report that fighting was underway in the Kursk region without elaborating. On Saturday, Zelensky said that in 2 days of battles near the Kursk village of Makhnovka, the Russian army lost up to a battalion of North Korean infantry soldiers and Russian paratroops. Quote, Ukraine launched a cross-border raid into the Kursk region last August, and Russia's army has since recaptured only about 40% of the lost territory. Ukraine's new offensive comes as both sides seek to strengthen their negotiating hand ahead of US President-elect Donald Trump's return to the White House on 20th of January, with Zelensky hinting that land around Kursk could play a part in the peace deal. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Monday that Ukraine's position in Kursk was important for any future negotiations. President Zelensky said security guarantees for Kiev to end Russia's war would only be effective if the US provides them, and that he hoped to meet Trump soon after his inauguration. He said Ukrainians were counting on Trump to force Moscow to end its war, and that Russia would escalate in Europe if Washington were to quit the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, military alliance. One person was killed and another wounded in Russian shelling in the city of Nikopol in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region on Sunday, local officials said, downstream along the Dnipro River. At least 6 people were wounded when Russian troops shelled the city of Kherson, the Kherson region's capital. Moscow sent 103 drones into Ukraine overnight to Sunday, Ukrainian officials said, with Ukraine's Air Force saying 61 drones were destroyed and 42 lost, likely due to electronic jamming. Russia's defense ministry said 61 Ukrainian drones were shot down in western Russia. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported hearing loud blasts near Ukraine's Zaporizhia nuclear plant on Sunday, coinciding with reports of a drone attack on the plant's training center. Rafael Grossi, the head of a nuclear watchdog, said, dozens of sea mammals have been found dead since last month's Russian oil tanker spill in the Black Sea, a dolphin rescue center said as authorities attempt to contain the disaster. The spill began on 15th December, when 2 aging Russian tankers were caught in a storm off the Kerch Strait, linking Crimea to southern Russia. One sank and the other ran aground, pouring about 2,400 tons of a heavy fuel oil into the surrounding waters. Linda, that was a pretty long update. Lots there to sort of discuss. Is there anything there that really sticks out to you, or just a sort of comment that you'd have on the Ukraine situation?
I think my only comment, Patrick, really is that everything seems to be just on hold, waiting for Trump to come into office. And there's an awful lot of, an awful lot of hopes about Trump, but there's also an awful lot of concerns about Trump as well. I think Zelensky has summed up quite a lot of them by his pleading with Trump not to leave NATO is really important. But I mean, I worry that this expectation that Trump will come in, there'll be peace talks, and some kind of peace deal will be forged. I'm not convinced that Putin is entirely serious about this. It just suits him at the moment to be playing along. So I think really we won't know what's going on until Trump comes into office.
That's right. I believe the Trump promise is peace within 24 hours of him stepping into
Yeah.
office. So we shall see. For our next story, we've got the Middle East update. At least 45,854 Palestinians have been killed and 109,139 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, the Gaza Health Ministry has said. 49 people were killed in the past 24 hours, the ministry said. The health ministry was reported to have said that the Israeli military committed 3 massacres, quote, in Gaza over the past day, with deadly attacks having taken place in southern and central parts of the Strip. Israeli military airstrikes continued throughout the Gaza Strip on Sunday, with an airstrike killing 5 people in a house in the Nuseirat camp in central Gaza and another killing 4 in Jabalia in the territory's north, Gaza health officials have said. Later in the day, an airstrike hit a police station in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, killing 5 people, medics have stated. Israel and Hamas are wrangling over the details of a potential deal to halt Israel's war on the Gaza Strip and return hostages home. A Hamas official said the group had approved a list of 34 Israeli hostages to be returned as part of a deal that could eventually lead to a ceasefire. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office swiftly issued a statement saying Hamas had not provided such a list. Israel said on Monday that Hamas had yet to clarify whether the 34 hostages it claimed it was ready to free were dead or alive. Foreign ministers from the UAE and Syria's new government discussed strengthening relations at a meeting during the first official Syrian visit to the Gulf country since the overthrow of former President Bashar al-Assad. Turkey said that it was only a matter of time before Syrian Kurdish fighters, seen by the West as essential in the fighting against Islamic State jihadists, would be, quote, eliminated. Gunmen opened fire on a bus and other vehicles near a village in the occupied West Bank, killing 3 people and injuring 8, the emergency services said. The Israeli military reported that troops were pursuing the terrorist who carried out the attack near the village of Al-Funduk. Israeli forces fired on a World Food Program convoy in Gaza on Sunday, hitting vehicles carrying 8 staff members some 16 times. World Health Organization, the World Health Organization's Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has urged Israel to release Dr. Hassam Abu Safia, director of northern Gaza's Kamal Adwan Hospital, who was arrested as the Israeli military military forced patients and medical staff to leave the health facility on the 27th of December. Quote, Kamal Adwan Hospital in North Gaza remains completely out of function, and we have received no updates on the safety and well-being of its director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, since his detention on the 27th of December, the WHO chief posted on X on Saturday. Going on to say, we continue to urge Israel to release him. We repeat, attacks on hospitals and health professionals must end. People in Gaza need access to health care, he wrote. 2 Palestinians, including a 17-year-old boy, were killed by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank on Sunday, according to the Palestinian Fatah Party and the Palestinian Health Ministry. Palestinian media said Israeli forces opened fire on the home of a 37-year-old man in a town near Jenin. The health ministry said the 17-year-old boy was killed in an Israeli raid in the Askar camp in Nablus. Linda, passing over to you again. What do you make of the developments in the Israeli-Gaza conflict and the Middle East as a whole, as there is obviously a lot going on in that region?
Well, as far as Israel and Gaza is concerned, it just carries on, and we seem to always get up a few hopes about peace talks, and then they are dashed again. I was quite horrified yet again, and horrified all the time about what the IDF are doing in Gaza. But the firing on the World Food Programme convoy is really serious. I understand from what I've read that the vehicle's clearly marked as to what it was, but there was a deliberate firing. So it seems that Israel do not want people seeing what's actually going on there. You know, the killing of journalists, the forcing of journalists out of the country, and their relationships with non-governmental organisations, humanitarian aid workers. It's like they are want to do everything undercover, and that gives me a lot of concerns as well. We already know that they target hospitals, and we know about the doctor who's been held. There's a lot we know, but my concern is what's going on that we don't know. And I think about the West Bank, the ongoing occupation there, the erosion of Palestinian rights there. But meanwhile, we still have, for example, America agreeing arms deals with Israel. So we're not that much further forward at all than we've been all the way through this. As far as Syria is concerned, you know, it's still the hope beyond hope that things will work out better there, that it is a new start for the country. Although I certainly am concerned at Turkey's stance on the Kurds. And I noticed that President Macron of France has come in support of the Kurds in Syria. But the language that's been used by Turkey about elimination, pretty grim. So let's hope that the new regime in Syria, you know, which is being part of discussions with other countries, you know, let's hope that carries on in a positive manner.
Thank you very much, Linda. Shifting our focus over to Scotland, the First Minister warns that warns of a budget stalemate and risks feeding forces of anti-politics and populism. In his first speech of a new year, First Minister John Swinney has called on Parliament to unite and support the 2025 to 26 budget bill and warned of the consequences for the country if it does not. In a major speech in Edinburgh to representatives from organisations across the public and private sector, the First Minister gave a stark warning that blocking the Scottish Government's draft budget risks feeding the forces of anti-politics and populism. The First Minister said that if Parliament votes down the budget in pursuit of stalemates instead of progress and delivery, then it will be people from across Scotland who will suffer. The First Minister said, quote, "If we are to meet the challenge of this age, we have to make sure that our politics works for the people we serve. And that means, ultimately, doing the hard work that ensures Scotland has a budget. If a budget falls, the impact will not be felt primarily directly by the MSPs who choose to vote no. It will be felt by the people in this room and the people you serve. Voters will rightly struggle to understand why politicians, despite being in agreement with probably more than 95% of the budget's contents, choose to block it from passing to prove some nebulous and ultimately highly damaging political point. We do not have to look far beyond Scotland's shores to see what happens when politicians and political parties pursue stalemates instead of progress and delivery. So be in no doubt, if people do not see Scotland's Parliament delivering progress for Scotland's people, if instead it embarks down a path of political posturing and intransigence, then we run a real risk of feeding the forces of anti-politics and of populism. This is not something I am prepared to countenance in Scotland, because in that circumstance, nobody wins. In these opening days of 2025, let us resolve that it be a year of progress for Scotland. The first step is for Parliament to come together and to pass a budget that enables us to get on with delivering. So let's choose progress, let's choose renewal, and let's choose hope. Linda, what do you make of those words from the First Minister right there?
Well, I say good on John Swinney. You know, let's choose hope. I think in this world, that's what we need. and we can achieve better things if people work together. But what I really, really appreciated about what John said today was the pointing out that actually the role of elected members is to serve the people. It's not to serve themselves. It's not to gain political points just for the sake of it. It is to serve the people. And as he also said, the vast majority of the very good budget that was put forward by the Scottish Government is not at odds with, for example, the Labour Party in Scotland. Therefore, to oppose it is no more than political posturing. The way the country is, the way the world is, in fact, let's have a bit of sense here. So I think that's what came out for me most about what John Swinney said, was his sincerity and his absolute commitment to the people who elected the Scottish Government. So I hope very much that sense is seen and that the budget will not be voted down for the sake of it, because that will damage the people that every single one of these MSPs was elected to serve.
There's a certain narrative here that I just wanted to touch on really quick before we move on to the next story.
Yeah.
There's a sort of concept being touched on that there is a level of anti-institution or maybe populist thought rising in many parts of Europe and here as well.
Yeah.
Do you have hope? Do you sort of see potentially that the outcomes of the last general election and also some of the pressure being put on the main political parties might actually lead to a healthy, I don't know, intensifying the heat on these parties to deliver something for people? Could this actually just be
Yeah.
a healthy democratic step for us, where come the next couple of years, these parties feel like pressured to deliver more, and they can sort of reemerge victorious in come next election?
Public service and democracy. Yes. I don't think you can ever lose hope about that. Um, I think I think the choices that the Labour Party have made since they came into power have been ridiculous. That we've covered all that before here in this programme. They have time to reset. And then when you look at the Tories, I'm horrified. I've been horrified by the Tories for a long time, I have to say, but I'm getting more and more horrified. I mean, they just seem to be playing to reform, the Reform Party all the time. And strange though it may seem to say, from what I've seen, Nigel Farage seems to be the sort of acceptable face of reform, because some of those at his back are absolutely horrendous. And he seems to be trying to keep a lid on some of that. So that these are the forces of populism that use rhetoric, that use untruths, misdirection to try and get the popular vote. And this is what they've been doing. I think the Tories are certainly jumping on that bandwagon at every available opportunity. That's not healthy. I hope that the Labour Party in the UK and indeed the branch office in Scotland will see sense in that and recognise that the public service ethic, that democracy is very, very precious, and you don't play games with it. So I think Scotland could be a bit of a beacon within the UK on the way forward for this, even within the devolved settlement that stymies us in so many ways. And I think Anna Sarwar, Jackie Baillie should stand by some of the convictions they've been espousing for years and look at what's best for Scotland and be in support of the Scottish Government. Not in everything, because that would just be naive. But as far as this budget is concerned, there is not a lot they can disagree with. So stand up for your principles and stand up for Scotland. And yes, I have hopes that we can do that further across the UK.
Thank you very much, Linda, also for the wonderful segue as we shift our focus over to Anas Sarwar, who is currently signaling potentially a move to the right on his view of social security spending in Scotland. Following an Sarwar's speech in Glasgow today, the Labour leader in Scotland has come in for criticism after appearing to abandon support for increasing the Scottish child payment. Daily Record's political editor, Paul Hutchin, said, Scotland's Labour leader, Anas Sarwar, used to believe in a £40 a week Scottish child payment. In his speech in Glasgow, he has now moved away from the centre-left on social security. In a post on X, this was stated. The SNP called Labour in Scotland pledging to cut spending on tackling child poverty a, quote, dangerous misstep. In his speech today, Mr. Anas Sarwar set out that if Labour were in power in Scotland, they would immediately seek to cut spending on social security support payments. These payments, including a game-changing Scottish child payment, are vital in driving down poverty levels across Scotland. This approach from Anas Sarwar reflects the position Sir Keir Starmer, who since becoming Prime Minister has chosen to keep the two-child benefit cap, a policy which the SNP has committed to scrapping in Scotland. The SNP doesn't support having a two-child benefit cap. SNP MSP Colette Stevenson said, quote, Anas Sarwar has decided to kick off 2025 echoing the Tories. If he wanted to cut vital supports such as the Scottish child payment, he should come out and say it. It is clear that Scottish Labour has no ambition for Social Security Scotland other than to turn it into a replica DWP, with all the cruel sanctions and policies that go along with it. The SNP government has put forward a budget that provides hope to the people of Scotland, ensuring those who need to support the most get it. It is up to opposition MSPs to examine their conscience and back it. Linda, what do you make of this dialogue? What do you think? What are the arguments being brought forward for scrapping some of these social programs? Is it a push for economic activity? Is this the correct way about it, or are there better ways to do it?
You know, these things aren't mutually exclusive. You can look at the whole package. I'm quite horrified by what Anas Sarwar said today, as reported by Paul Hutchin. To be backing away from the Scottish child payment when all the studies have shown, I can't remember the figures, but the Joseph Rowntree Foundation fairly recently showed quite clearly that the Scottish child payment is a game changer in terms of eradication of child poverty. And, you know, here we have a Labour leader in Scotland who is having a go at measures that eradicate child poverty. And what he's doing is saying that we shouldn't have so much welfare, really, Anas, but it should all be about work. So remember that the Labour Party have consistently, over the years, been against Scottish Parliament having the right to make their own rules about work and employment. They have refused the transfer of powers on employment into the Scottish Parliament. So this is no more than political posturing. And I noticed that Colette Stevenson said Anas Sarwar's following the Tories, echoing the Tories, I think was the words.
That's right.
No, he's echoing Starmer and the UK Labour Party, of which of course is part. He's echoing Starmer, who has already echoed the Tories. So it is a shift by the Labour Party, a horrendous shift by the Labour Party, generally, that Anas Sarwar is buying into, even though he tries to say that what he cares about is Scotland. So it's a very confused stance. It is going against measures that have been shown to have an effect on child poverty, and it's demanding that Scotland do something that we don't actually have the powers to have, which is really look at employment in the round, because these things go together. So I don't think people will buy it at all. And it sounds to me like, as branch office manager, he's been instructed and maybe had a wee bit of a telling off for pretending that they're a wee bit different from their pals down in Westminster.
Thank you very much, Linda. A business survey finds that UK companies planning to increase prices in the next 3 months. More than half of British companies are planning price rises in the next 3 months, according to the research that found UK business confidence that found that UK business confidence has slumped to its lowest since the chaos of Liz Truss's brief stint as Prime Minister. Of 4,800 businesses polled by the British Chambers of Commerce (BCC), 55% said they expect to increase prices by April, up from 39% in a similar survey in the second half of last year. There was also a steep increase in concern about looming tax rises after the government revealed a budget in October that relied heavily on business taxation to raise £40 billion in extra revenues, including £25 billion more in employer national insurance contributions, NICs. Director General of the BCC, Siobhan Haviland, warned that firms of all shapes and sizes are telling us the national insurance hike is particularly damaging. Businesses are already cutting back on investment and say they will have to put prices up in the coming months. Commenting, S&P economy spokesperson Dave Dugan MP said, "There's now a very real danger the Labour government's national insurance tax hike will result in a fresh wave of price rises in the shops and deepen the UK cost of living crisis for families. Millions of households across Scotland and the UK will pay the price if the Labour Party tax blow results in a higher cost of living, squeezed wages and job losses as businesses cut back. The UK government should be making every effort to reduce the cost of living, but instead they are increasing it as the cost of everyday goods and energy bills rise, while the UK economy slumps. When economic growth is key, it makes no sense for Keir Starmer to damage the economy by hitting businesses and public services with tax rises that threaten jobs, wages, and investment." Mr. Dugan called on the UK government to urgently outline how it will restore business confidence, fully protect public services from, quote, the Labour Party tax hike, and ensure households aren't hit in the pocket. Linda, for the tax rises in the budget, do you see the business contribution to national insurance as is this like a particularly bad tax to rise? And if so, why was this the one chosen to rise in the first place?
Well, I think the first thing, that to be made very clear, and I think people are now recognising it, is that national insurance is just part of national tax. It's it's just part of the whole tax take. It is
Mhm.
not put aside for any specific reason, although folk think it's about the health service and things. It's just a general tax increase. And here we have it on employers. I think all the organisations that deal with employers express real concern about this. And here we have this very serious business survey, and Dave Dugan's quite right. Something should give on this, because if we're really saying morale is as low as it's ever been since Liz Truss, that's pretty bad, because Liz Truss and what she did was pretty bad. So price rises, again, Dave is absolutely right. This affects the consumer. It affects every single one of us. It feeds into the cost of living increases. And you've asked me, um, why they did this. I I have given up trying to work out why the Labour Party down there in UK have done some of the things they've done, because they talk about economic growth and then they seem to do things that stop it. I mean, two examples: the winter fuel payment. There's one thing. Um, the WASPy stuff. They have pulled back from giving money to people who spend and help with the economy. That's a very basic thing. These are the groups that spend money to help with the economy, are the elderly. And that's why I believed in the universality of the fuel payment, for example, which they have stopped. So I cannot make sense of some of the decisions they have taken. I hope they're rethinking a lot of it. They keep talking about resetting this, resetting that. But the devil is in the detail. We never see anything that's actually going to happen there. And to also tie in with the last discussion we've had, I think it's really interesting that on one hand, you have this business survey, which is talking about morale being so low and all the price increases that are coming our way that's going to affect everyone. Meanwhile, you have the Scottish Retail Consortium, who are asking political parties in Scotland to vote for the Scottish Government's budget. I mean, they've said it's not perfect, but we need this budget to move forward. So again, to use the phrase that's becoming somewhat hackneyed, a tale of two governments. You have one government down in Westminster, which is just being hammered by everyone who works out, what they're doing economically to the country. And then on the other hand, you have Scottish Government, which has come up with a budget which the Scottish Retail Consortium is urging to be passed. So perhaps Keir Starmer should be looking at what the Scottish Government is trying to achieve. Perhaps Anas Sarwar should be looking at what the Scottish Government is trying to achieve and the hopes and aspirations of the Scottish Government in service of the people who they represent, and having a word with his bosses down in London.
Thank you, Linda. And I suppose that just raises the question of how much more Scotland could do if only it had even more levers of power under its grasp.
Well,
But
yeah, and back to the previous discussion about employment law. Yeah, absolutely.
But on that note, I think that would be too big of a discussion, I suppose. So we can carry on to the next story. So since the 1st of January, the start of a new year, the FTSE 100 bosses got more money by noon today than the average worker will make in the whole of 2025. Today being just the 6th of January. So after 6 days, they will have by noon today they will have earned more than the average worker will make in all of this year. The chief executive of FTSE 100 companies will have made more money in 2025 by midday today than their average worker does in the whole year, according to the latest measure of inequality between bosses and their employees. Median pay for FTSE 100 chief executives is £4.22 million, 113 times the median full-time workers' pay of £37,430, according to the campaign group. The High Pay Centre. Bosses will hit the milestone marginally quicker this year than last, when it has reached at 1 p.m. on the third working day of the year. Workers' pay did improve over year, according to the figures disclosed by the companies. Pay for bosses rose by 2.5% compared to 7% for workers. However, bosses' pay is at record levels. The annual study aims to highlight the huge disparity in pay for bosses and their staff, a gap that has grown bigger in recent decades, prompting calls for action for unions and some politicians. Linda, just to get you to comment on this, is this something that matters? Is it the disparity between different groups that matters, or is it more so just what each group can afford that matters? What does this tell us? Just the disparity itself.
Well, I think the disparity does matter. I think the divide between those who have and those who have not, widening all the time, as you said, Patryk, is in a society that is capable of being much fairer than ours is just appalling. And, when you look back, it was actually the divide started to widen even under Tony Blair. So under the last Labour government, the divide started to widen. Remember, it was pretty sure it was, I don't know if it was Tony Blair's or Gordon Brown's government that actually brought in 0 hours contracts and stuff like that. That is one of the factors that has worked on this widening divide between the haves and the have-nots. And no one with the power seems to be really, really serious about dealing with this. And I'll go back to the 0 hours contract issue, for example. I mean, even though I've been retired nearly 4 years now, I still get folk that come on to me now and then, former constituents, to talk about some of the issues that they have had, because I'm still involved locally in charity work, etc. And people are having a terrible time. 0 hours contracts is the thing that comes up again and again. I mean, people on their way to work and getting a text to say, we don't need you after all today, stuff like this.
Mm.
People getting told that they've got 2 weeks' work ahead and then getting cancelled on a daily basis. And it turns out these agencies have just told everybody that they are required for this time period. And then they decide the day before who's in and who's not. And you've got a so-called Labour Party, a party that are supposed to care about the workers, who have said, they started out, I think, by saying we'll eliminate 0 hours contracts. Now they're saying we will eliminate exploitative 0 hours contracts, with never saying what exploitative actually means. Don't hold your breath waiting for that to be sensible. So the whole situation, to me, is completely unacceptable in a society which should be looking after people, which should be making things fairer, which should be working towards giving a sense of well-being to each and every citizen where at all possible. And nobody with any power seems to be taking it on at all. And I absolutely have faith that if Scotland was an independent country, that's the kind of thing we could properly tackle. I'm fed up with politicians saying things like, we tried to do this, but we weren't able to do it, when actually they have all the powers to hand like they do at Westminster. And no one seems serious about doing it because they're all looking to the next election. They're all trying to outdo each other in appealing to those they think will vote for them. And I think that's one of the big problems about the system that we have. And, Scotland as an independent nation could do so much better and come up with a system that requires people to work together properly. On the theme of what we're talking about tonight, Patryk, is the service of those who put you there. And that's what's sadly lacking.
Thank you so much. A report lays bare the damaging impact of Brexit. Labour has been criticised for failing to tackle the spiralling costs Brexit is having on the economy and industries in the UK. Almost 5 years on from leaving the EU, a report has shown the damning statistics that reveal the true cost of Brexit. The summary lays bare the huge and ever-increasing consequence that Brexit is having on the UK's economy and key industries, including a £30.2 billion for the cost of Britain's settlement with the EU, according to the latest Treasury estimates. A drop of £2.8 billion in food exports to the EU each year since the end of a transition period, according to the Centre for Inclusive Trade Policy. A drop of £27 billion in goods exports in 2022 alone, according to the Centre for Economic Performance at LSE. An annual shortfall in Treasury finances of almost £45 billion, according to the European Movement UK. And £100 billion in lost output each year. SNP Westminster Europe spokesperson Stephen Geffins, MP, said the following: Labour needs to finally wake up to the spiralling cost of Brexit if they want to have any credibility left at all. 5 years on from leaving the EU, these statistics lay bare the indisputable fact that Brexit has been an unparalleled disaster for businesses and wider society. Yet Westminster continues to bury its head in the sand. The public purse has lost £45 billion annually as a result of Brexit. That's almost double what Labour hopes to raise in the misguided increase to employer national insurance contributions. That will hurt the public and private sector alike. On top of these statistics, Brexit is also robbing our young people of the right to live, work, and study across Europe, opportunities enjoyed by Labour ministers. Labour has failed to offset any of the damage caused by Brexit by refusing to engage in any discussion about returning to the single market, amending the Internal Market Act, or the introduction of a Scottish visa pilot, despite promising to do so. Once again, Scotland is being forced to keep paying the price for Westminster's damaging choices, and it's not good enough. Scotland deserves better. And if I could just get you to comment on this report, some pretty damning stuff, no?
Absolutely. And good on Stephen Gethens for forcing this admission, because from what I gather, it was only through heavy questioning by Stephen that this information has come out. So good on him. I mean, it's something that we've been talking about for a long time, the recognition of the damage that Brexit has caused, that has been hidden, and is only now starting to come out. And there'll be more, because we shouldn't forget that this is just food exports, crashed by a fifth. And that's just food. There's other issues as well. And something else we should never forget is that Scotland voted overwhelmingly to stay in the EU and were dragged out against our will by the UK vote. So again, Scotland as an independent nation would not have been facing this. And again, the hypocrisy of all these politicians that at the time were saying, "Oh, if you vote yes for Scotland to be an independent country, you'll have to leave the EU." Well, here we are. We're not independent, and we're not in the EU. So, Labour Party. This is. I remember. In fact, it may be anecdotal, but it's first hand from me. I remember sitting watching with my sister-in-law, who's a Londoner, Keir Starmer, talking against the Tories about the benefit of Europe when they were in opposition, benefits of Europe and how we should stay in, and he was an absolute Europhile. And I remember Maureen saying to me, "Do you know, if he was the leader of the Labour Party, they might get elected because he talks a lot of sense." And here he is, leader of the Labour Party, he's the Prime Minister, and he's totally backtracked on so much. From someone who was an ardent EU person. He doesn't even want to talk about rejoining the customs union. He doesn't even want to talk about perhaps finding a way of getting back in the single market or any of these things.
And sorry,
And doesn't
and why is that, do you think? Sorry to interrupt, Linda, but this is
yeah,
a very important thing you're bringing up. Is this a lack of
yeah.
principles? Is this political maneuvering? What is this?
I think it's they have looked at some of the figures that have come back from seats they've won, perhaps, and thought, oh, these areas that we want to hold on to are still anti-EU, and if we are seen to be backing off, we could lose support there. There's the issue about trying to out-Tory the Tories on that. There is the running scared of Farage and his like on that. But I absolutely believe that if they really put a good case forward for these things, if they followed up on their principles and were seen to follow up on principles as opposed to just looking at electoral gain, they would start to gain a respect. I think if they did the proper work to get the realities out there and the potentials and a bit of hope for people, back to that theme for tonight, a bit of hope, I think that could turn that, because all they're doing is feeding in to the rhetoric that blames the EU for so much. They're also feeding in to the rhetoric that politicians can't be trusted, and feeding into the rhetoric that is damaging democracy all the way. So, you know, if we accept, and I hate the thought of accepting this, if we accept that the UK can't just join the EU, though I still believe that Scotland could as an independent country, we're at where we're at. If we're saying we're not rejoining the EU, have proper discussions
Hmm.
about doing some kind of partnership with the EU that would allow us to be looking at things like proper single market. We've already got tariff free in some things. Let's advance on that, because I absolutely believe with the right will it could be done. Because it's not just exports to the EU that have been badly affected, as shown in this report. It's imports from the EU as well. So there is common ground there of concern.
Hmm.
especially for Scotland, because Scotland has a wonderful record on food and drink. So let's look at properly doing things like the visa scheme for Scotland and all sorts of things. And also, food standards, there's another concern. If we're not looking to the EU, but looking to elsewhere, like across the Atlantic, for example, on imports,
Hmm.
there's an issue there about food standards. And unfortunately, the legislation that has gone through Westminster means that Scotland could be completely shafted on these issues, and all the good work that we have done over the years on Scotland the brand and on our standards could be eroded.
And I am conscious of time concerns, but I think that this is a pretty big, a pretty important issue to sort of maybe discuss just a
Yeah.
little further. The way that I understand our sort of anti-European, anti-EU membership, like rhetoric and talking points, I don't think anybody would have been is upset about us being able to trade well with the EU. You know, obviously there are concerns about potentially immigration. There are concerns about what kind of rules we might have to abide by, like a lack of authority or whatever. I understand that. I understand that those are talking points that still are present in many communities. But I think that most people would be happy about being able to trade in the UK, being able to have like more open trade with the EU. Maybe some protectionism aside, but for the EU itself, how did they view a sort of trade only partnership without then fully buying us into the overall like EU dream? Is this something that the EU does? I genuinely don't know. Do they have like just trade agreements with no other strings attached? Is this something that the EU itself is willing to do? Is this a conversation that's had? You know.
Well, you're absolutely right, Patrick, in that we should be looking at these things. And if, as I said, we accept that we're not going to be full members of the EU under the UK, let's look at areas of mutual advantage and let's
Right.
have proper discussions with them. Yeah, we do. I mean, for example, Switzerland, let's use Switzerland as an example, is
Sure.
not a member of the EU, but it does have trading agreements and other kind of freedom of movement agreements, etc., out
Mm-hmm.
with full membership. So it could be said they have a lot of the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what's wrong with the UK looking at the potential benefits as
Mm-hmm.
well? Now, there must be a benefit for the EU bloc countries in having that kind of agreement with Switzerland, with Liechtenstein, for example. I think it's, or is it Luxembourg? Luxembourg, sorry. Um, so there must be advantages there as well, because it wouldn't all just be one-sided.
Right.
So let's look at it with a seriousness, which I don't think has happened so far, because we're too busy as a UK entity pandering to the worst in UK society.
Are you aware of any sort of, I don't know, a bias that EU diplomats might have against Britain because they have left? Is that something that is present in the conversation?
It's not something I would know about, Patrick. I mean, it's a while since I was
Hmm.
involved in any discussions
I
with
understand that.
any players in the EU. Things are changing in the EU as well. We're seeing that day and daily. So no, I wouldn't want to comment on that. I do know there's a lot of goodwill towards Scotland. I can say
Okay.
that for sure through, um, you know, through being involved in the European movement in Scotland. I know that, but I'm not involved in any of these discussions anymore, I'm afraid.
It's wise to know your limits. I appreciate that, Linda, very much. Moving on to our next story, we've got Austria's far-right Freedom Party seeking talks to form coalition government. Austria's president has tasked the anti-immigration pro-Kremlin Freedom Party (FPO) with holding talks to form a ruling coalition, potentially paving the way for the far right to lead the government for the first time since the Second World War. After meeting the FPO leader Herbert Kickl in the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, Alexander van der Bellen said the party, which narrowly won the most votes in September's general election, could begin negotiations with the conservative Austrian People's Party (OVP) on forming a governing alliance. Quote, I didn't take this decision lightly, said the president, who, under the constitution, formally named the chancellor. Continues to say, I will continue to make sure that the principles and rules of our constitutions are respected and upheld. After months of negotiations by mainstream parties, attempts to form a coalition to block the far right collapsed at the weekend because of differences on how to revive the ailing Austrian economy and manage public finances. Chancellor Karl Nehammer of the OVP announced his intention to resign on Saturday after the talks broke down. He had repeatedly ruled out becoming junior partner to the FPO with Kickel as the head of government. The OVP said on Sunday it had nominated its general secretary, Christian Stocker, to act as interim leader. Stocker has expressed willingness to negotiate with the FPO and has been given the party's approval for this. The failure of the centrist parties to build an effective, quote, firewall against the FPO means Austria could soon join a growing bloc of EU countries led by the far right, including Italy and Netherlands, Slovakia, and Hungary. It also underlined the dilemma faced by democratic forces across Europe in fighting a rising tide of extremism as anti-immigration, Eurosceptic parties splinter the vote. Germany's unwieldy center-left led coalition under the Chancellor Olaf Scholz collapsed in November. The anti-Islam far-right Alternative for Deutschland party is polling at 19%, second behind the opposition Conservatives, ahead of a snap election next month. German Vice-Chancellor Robert Habeck of the Greens said developments in Austria should serve as a warning. Touching on a few countries in that story there, Linda, which of these stick out to you? What do you think is interesting to comment on here?
Well, I think, everything you've talked about tonight, Patrick, sort of segues into the other subjects, and this does as well. I mean, we've already talked about the changes in Europe, and the fact that they're moving to the far right, I think, is really concerning. Austria has been here before, back and forward in terms of this. I mean, the Freedom Party has a very worrying beginning, and their name is probably not very descriptive because it seems to be freedom for themselves and not for anybody else. So it is a concern that the President van der Bellen has felt that he has had to talk to them. I mean, it has to be said it was a democratic election. It's a country where coalitions take place because of the electoral system, and I think the Freedom Party, Kirk's party, got the most seats in that election. I've great respect for Nehammer resigning. He has just said that he can't deal with this. I notice that Van der Bellen has said that he will ensure that the constitution is upheld. So there must be great negotiations going on at the moment about concessions that will have to be made by both sides.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's very, very concerning. And it's concerning for us in the so-called West, but it's also concerning for countries which are facing hellish times at the moment through strife, wars, all sorts of things. An awful lot of them for which the foundations were laid by the West in the way they've dealt with these countries over the years. So when you look at what's happening, yes, in Europe, and when you look at the US as well, it's a concerning time all round.
Thank you very much. And once again, a beautiful segue. You mentioned the US, just as we're about to talk. President Biden banning new offshore drilling in US coastal waters ahead of a Trump inauguration. President Biden has banned offshore drilling across an immense area of coastal waters, weeks before Donald Trump takes office, pledging to massively increase fossil fuel production, and ahead of Congress certifying Trump's election victory today. The US president's ban encompasses the entire Atlantic coast and eastern Gulf of Mexico, as well as the Pacific coast of California, Oregon, and Washington, and a section of the Bering Sea off Alaska. A White House statement said the declaration protected more than 253 hectares of water. Quote, as hectares. There we go. Quote, as the climate crisis continues to threaten communities across the country and we are transitioning to a clean energy economy, now is the time to protect these coasts for our children and grandchildren, President Biden said in a statement, going on to continue. In balancing the many uses and benefits of America's ocean, it is clear to me that the relatively minimal fossil fuel potential in the areas I am withdrawing do not justify the environmental, public health, and economic risks that would come from the new leasing and drilling, he added. The ban does not have an end date and could be legally and politically tricky for Trump to overturn. Biden is taking the action under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act of 1953, which gives the federal government authority over the exploitation of offshore resources. However, the law does not expressly provide for presidents to unilaterally reverse a drilling ban without going through Congress. During his campaign, Trump pledged to, quote, unleash domestic fossil fuel production to help lower gas costs, despite the country already hitting record high extraction rates. Environmental groups, on the other hand, welcomed the decision. Quote, this is an epic ocean victory, said Joseph Gordon, climate and energy director of the conservation nonprofit Oceania. Our quote, he went on to say, our treasured coastal communities are now safeguarded for future generations. Later today, the U.S. Congress will certify Donald Trump's presidential election victory in an event heavy with symbolism 4 years to the day since Trump incited a violent mob to disrupt the ceremony in a bid to overturn the 2020 election defeat. Oh, it's January 6th. That's right. It's even year. Sorry. Vice President Kamala Harris, Trump's defeated Democratic opponent in November's election, will preside over a joint Senate and House of Representatives session to validate the result, which long-standing convention dictates should be a mere formality and a peaceful transfer of power. Speaking ahead of a fourth anniversary of what was widely viewed as the violent insurrection, President Biden urged American citizens not to forget the 6th of January 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol and repeated his declaration that his presidential predecessor and successor, Donald Trump, threatened democracy by inciting the supporters to carry out the assault. Linda, is this ban on further fossil fuel development? This is obviously a big part of Trump's energy strategy. Is this something that you expect him to challenge? Is this something that you expect him to be successful in challenging?
Well, I suspect he will challenge it, but I think the reason that it's now been said that the Lands Act doesn't allow this to be reversed is I think it came from a challenge that he made just post Obama, where Obama had done something similar and Trump challenged it, I think it was in 2019, and the court said, no, you can't just reverse that. But he'll try, he always tries. A lot himself, that man, tries to change history as he goes with all his talk about what happened at the storming before. But it's something else, that man. When you think about it, I think he at one point opposed some offshore development in Florida, which surely had nothing to do with where he lives. And if you remember, he opposed the offshore renewables at his
That's right.
golf course in Scotland
That's
as
correct.
well.
Yeah.
So it seems when it suits him, he will oppose. But if it doesn't directly affect him, he wants all sorts of drill and be damned to be going on. So interesting that, of course, the industry will all support Trump, the environmentalists, and I understand a lot of the states with coastal areas will oppose Trump as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Linda. Moving on to our next story, we've got the Scottish skills outcomes performing well despite UK skill inequalities being larger than other countries. New research from the Learning and Work Institute, LNW, have found that the UK has larger gaps in workforce skills between different parts of the country than most other European countries. The research shows that 2/3 of adults in London have higher education qualifications compared to just 1/3 in Great Lincolnshire. You are 3 times as likely to be qualified below GCSE levels in the West Midlands, 27%. The area with the worst qualification profile compared to West London, which has a 9%. The area with the best qualification profile. These skills gaps are far wider than in neighbouring countries. Another 290,000 people, the equivalent of the population of Coventry, would have GCSE equivalent qualifications in the West Midlands if the UK had lower inequality like in Denmark, France and Sweden. LNW warns, far from improving, the UK's postcode lottery in skills is on track to get worse over the next decade. While 71% of Londoners may have a higher education qualification by 2035, only 29% would in Hull and East Yorkshire. On these trends, the skills base in the capital and other parts of the south of England would match world-leading countries like Japan, South Korea, and Canada. But skills in other parts of the UK, improving more slowly and from a lower base, risk falling further down international rankings and being overtaken by countries including Estonia, Latvia, and New Zealand. The proportion of people with high qualifications is on track to rise, but with big differences between areas. The increase is predicted to be 64% to 71% in London, 54% to 65% in Scotland, 35% to 36% in Hull and East Yorkshire, with the UK averaging in an increase from 44% to 49%. The proportion of 16 to 19-year-olds qualified to NVQ level 3 in Scotland is at 30%, is almost double that in Tees Valley, which is at 16%, Northern Ireland at 18%, and Greater Manchester 19%. Definitely seeing a bit of a disparity here, Linda, with how big the disparity is in different parts of the UK, with Scotland performing pretty well, but England facing a lot of variation and a lot of variety. What do you attribute this sort of difference to?
Well, I think it's really interesting that Scotland, 65% of folk should have a degree by 2035, a very well-educated nation. Second only to London, which of course always has all the advantages of everything, when you look at that there. So Scotland is I think it's a big achievement by Scotland to be at that level, and well done everyone involved. It's interesting, Keir Starmer's talking about starting an agency, Skills England, yet another big idea from Keir Starmer. We've had Skills Development Scotland for many, many years now. And I think that is showing some advantage. That, along with the lack of tuition fees in Scottish universities, which must have a big impact on local people going to university. I mean, also people who would not a couple of decades ago have expected to be going to university because of costs, etc., now do. So that's a good news story for Scotland as well. We're doing well there. So lack of tuition fees, the Worker Skills Development Scotland, the aspirations of the Scottish Government, all have had a part to play in this. And that, despite not having the employment powers that we talked about previously, earlier in the programme. So I just wish that the mainstream media would report some of the good things that are happening in Scotland instead of always looking to focus on the bad because of the unionist agenda. Let's start looking at the good things. Let's start saying what Scotland is successful in and doing really well in. And that way, perhaps people will realise that with the powers of an independent nation, we could do so much better.
And with that, we've got praising Scotland's successes. For our last story, we've got the University of St. Andrews. Scientists shed new light on the role played by carbon dioxide in Earth's geological warming and cooling. Researchers from the University of St. Andrews have, for the first time, shed new light on the fundamental role played by carbon dioxide, CO2, in the Earth's geological warming and cooling. atmospheric carbon dioxide and Earth's most important greenhouse gases. Atmospheric carbon dioxide is Earth's most important the most important of Earth's greenhouse gases. Sorry about that. It absorbs heat and radiates much of it back to Earth. So when atmospheric CO2 rises, Earth's climate warms. However, while the role CO2 plays in driving recent climate change is well understood, its role in the geological past has been locked in rocks. Quote. For the first time, new research led by a team from the School of Earth and Environmental Sciences of the University of St. Andrews and published in Nature Geoscience on the Monday, 6th of January, today, has unlocked an important part of a geological record that captures one of the biggest climatic interesting, transitions witnessed by complex life. The new findings provide crucial evidence that for hundreds of millions of years, CO2 has been regulating climate and environmental conditions on Earth, playing a pivotal role as the world moves in and out of ice ages. Lead researcher from St. Andrews, Dr. Hanna Yurekova, worked with 9 other universities and institutions around the world to reconstruct how CO2 changed during the Carboniferous and Permian periods between 335 to 265 million years ago, a time known as the late Paleozoic Ice Age, when Earth's climate cooled dramatically. Researchers used the chemical fingerprints stored in fossil brachiopod shells, ancient clam-like organisms, which are among the oldest existing animals and still inhabit oceans today. These shells are preserved across all time periods of the fossil records, archiving clues to how Earth's climate and environment has evolved. By combining multiple chemical fingerprints, the team was able to precisely calculate how much CO2 was in Earth's atmosphere in the past and how it changed. Quote, this showed the late Paleozoic Ice Age had prolonged low CO2 levels, unprecedented in Earth's history. Atmospheric CO2 has rose abruptly 294 million years ago due to large-scale volcanic eruptions, warming the planet and melting back the ice, explains Dr. Yurekova, lead author of the study. Going on to say, the end of the late Paleozoic Ice Age was a turning point in the evolution of life and the environment, leading to the rise of reptiles. Now we know it was paced by carbon dioxide. This research provides new insight on how CO2 and Earth's climate evolved in long geological timescales, demonstrating a central role for CO2 in major climate transitions. Low atmospheric CO2 in the Carboniferous period caused an extensive ice age, while elevated CO2 levels in the beginning of the Permian period drove global warming and ice sheet melt. Quote, this time interval gives a potential geological analog for the impact of CO2 on our planet, explains Dr. James Ray, who co-authored the study. CO2 emissions in the past caused a major global warming and sea level rise, and if left unchecked, will do again in future. What a beautiful success for our St. Andrews researchers. What could we say about this, Linda? What can we add to the story?
Well, the first thing I'll say is, Patrick, that I'm awfully glad that it was you that had the paleo whatsits to talk about.
Oh no.
The second thing I would say, yeah, huge success story. And yet again, Scotland's universities punching way above their weight when
Absolutely.
it comes to science, when it comes to research. And, they've unlocked that key that proves the effect that carbon dioxide has had on global warming
Yes.
and the environmental impact
And more
on our
geologically
planet.
on the rocks themselves.
Yeah, and paleo whatsits as well.
Yeah,
So,
indeed.
but fantastic work,
Absolutely.
absolutely great work. And when you put that in contrast to the likes of Donald Trump wanting to drill, do this, do that, when you put it against all these climate change deniers and all the people that say there isn't a problem, and we now know that CO2 emissions are a big problem, CO2 has been central to all the changes to our planet over these millennia. So well done, St Andrews University. Absolutely superb work.
Yeah, and absolutely. And just before we go, I will quickly point out there is this ongoing narrative in all of these like Scottish stories. Whenever we focus on something happening in Scotland itself, there's always this really strong element of cooperation with stuff. There's almost like this, just the zeitgeist of Scottish institutions and Scottish movements is to cooperate. In all of these science stories, it's always multiple universities. Sometimes there's like big government involvement. There's always these different institutions and different moving factors coming together for a thing. And this, I think, this tracks in our like political biases and our like political track record. There's just this bias for involving multiple people into the pie and making that pie of a more glorious for it.
That was
And yeah,
one of the other concerns about Brexit, Patrick,
oh, of
was that
course,
that
yeah,
kind of joint working for research could be damaged. Yeah,
yeah.
but we're doing great stuff.
And with that, since we're already over time, with that, we will close for this evening. Thank you for watching. Thank you to our guests as well. Before I go, I will remind you that Broadcasting Scotland depends on the generosity of all of its supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly donation, thank you very much. We have raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, £16,000 short of our £36,000 goal, unfortunately. We had to borrow £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive, but the pressure is still on, and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We need more regular subscribers, and we need to clear our debts as well. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thanks again to Linda Fabiani for all of her insight on all the stories. You were brilliant today. And goodbye. Thank you for watching. Sorry.